Welcome. This is Dr. John Grazel, the Baha'i Chair for World Peace, and this segment is a synopsis of our discussion in the course on peace building, post conflict reconstruction, and international development on infrastructure development. It actually is a companion of a video that is on our website called Crafting Institutions for Self Governing Irrigation Systems. This is a video that was made by Eleanor Ostrom, Nobel Prize winner. It's a brilliant analysis of the governance, not only of irrigation systems, but of infrastructure, and something that I recommend to everyone to look at. This is a companion. This is a larger discussion of the whole question of infrastructure development. Uh, Infrastructure development has been at the heart, beginning with the Marshall Plan of international development. There's also a consensus of agreement about the challenges that the world faces in infrastructure. There's a massive need for new infrastructures. There's been estimates $250 billion a year in Asia alone. The complexity of infrastructure is getting more and more difficult and causing more and more problems. The need in terms of growing populations and expectations makes speed of the essence. You just can't use old ways of doing it. Innovation is absolutely indispensable. The solutions are global, not only local. That's because the knowledge, the investment, even the connectivities when you're building things like airports. I mean, you're talking about global infrastructure, even when you're talking about local infrastructure. And the quicker you do it upfront, the better. So it can actually work as a multiplier for development. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is very often that the infrastructure doesn't work. It's not only that it doesn't get built, it doesn't work. I use as an image of that a particular picture that experience I had in the Philippines, where you actually saw a bridge that had been built and was ready to be completed, except that it came up against the walls of an old cathedral, and the engineers who had built the bridge expected the people to tear down the cathedral, and they didn't. And it symbolizes so much of what happens when infrastructure somehow seems to be put in place, and then all sorts of other processes suddenly don't work, from how it can be managed to people's reactions to it, to actual protests against it. Why does that occur? Well, here's the quick synopsis. First of all, there's hard and soft infrastructure, and we tend to think about the hard infrastructure: build the bridge, build the tracks, build the runway. We don't look at what makes it work. Well, that's the soft infrastructure. What makes infrastructure actually work and be maintained and achieve its purpose. And that element requires an enormous amount of integration of factors. And because that element is normally put off, by the time it comes, very often not only haven't those factors been integrated, but it becomes difficult to integrate them because you've actually built something hard that doesn't correspond to what you need soft. Now, what are those factors? The most interesting one is, first of all, is there's a failure to understand that we live in a temporal world, and there's short, medium, and long-term elements, benefits, incentives that are at work. And unless you address those simultaneously, you're not going to get the integrity of integration that you need. Now, so short-term benefit, you say, I need an airport, you build a runway, okay? But does that mean that you actually have put in place the capacities to really run an airport, or you just have basically a plot of land? But a lot of people are so fixated on the short-term benefits, and let's cut the ribbon. They don't care whether the airport has staff, or the school has teachers, or the hospital actually can keep up its recurring costs. Then there, at the same time, you have to worry about midterm matters, and this is where institutional incentives come in. You have to create an institution around infrastructure. Infrastructure is a constant system that has to be maintained, and unless you built up the institutional capacity to run it, to maintain it, to sustain it, it's going to collapse. And then there's the long-term issues. And the long-term issues is how that infrastructure, even if it is successful, affects other things such as culture and social values. And as the example of the bridge against the cathedral shows, it doesn't matter whether the bridge is good, and even if you have the capacity to maintain the bridge, if it suddenly comes up against a strong opposing social value, you can get resistance that kills that. And where you see that is you very often get major political repercussions in infrastructure such as the construction of dams that uproot enormous numbers of people and change lives, and actually destroy centuries of other types of investments uh, that people haven't worried about until it's too late to avoid the conflict that arises out of it. So what ends up is that you have an investment in infrastructure, but it doesn't sustain itself. Uh, Basically, the wheels come off the truck at the last minute because you haven't worked in to the system how you're going to really maintain that truck, and how you're going to pay for its gas, and who's it's going to serve, and who has an interest to keep it running. Now, what that leads us to is what we really should be concentrating on in infrastructure is not only the hard, but the soft, and particularly what I call infrastructure capacity building. You have to build capacities, and you have to build incentives for those capacities to work. That has to be built, the soft infrastructure, at the same time as you're building the hard, not later. You have to give people, well, if you're building something, you have to make sure you're building capacities to run it, to manage it, but you also have to build incentives for people to use those capacities. Are they going to be rewarded for using them? Are they going to get solid pay? Or are you going to make believe that you don't have to pay them salary and therefore they have to steal money from what would be the fee structure? Or have you worked with the local population so that they see a benefit, so that they don't steal the electricity from the wiring that you put in, because in fact you haven't given them any opportunity to actually access it in a way that they can benefit. So this element of infrastructure capacity building is the secret of success, building capacity and the incentives for those capacities to work as they're supposed to, along with the hard infrastructure, not after it. And it's not easy. And this is where international development actually has a unique role in the world. Because, in fact, you have a conflict. Investors in infrastructure, they want an early return. People want to see immediate benefits. That's not so easy. Very often, a well-planned project can negotiate a little enough for both parties. Investors, they want low risk. Foreign assistance is in a high risk situation. It's very often a good international project can help lower the risk by guarantees. Investors want immediate results. Development really looks for transformational change. Investors want a long-term commitment, but politics is a fickle problem. Investors like clarity. Foreign assistance very often has to deal with a lot of ancillary factors. Um, what all of these make it so important that you actually have a real partnership around major infrastructure development, where private sector does what it does best, the public and the beneficiaries understand and participate, and there's a tremendous opportunity for the international player actually to act as a broker between them, and come in with solutions that neither of them by themselves actually can generate, but from being due diligence to actually come in with associated activities that make it beneficial for them to compromise. How do you go about doing that? Remember, there's hard and soft infrastructure. The soft is as important. The soft is determined by local realities, not by some grand theory. You have to maximize participation of all the stakeholders. You have to simultaneously consider the short, medium, and long-term incentives. You must make efficiency, equity, and sustainability things that you simultaneously address and integrate into the design of the infrastructure. And never forget, it's in the end, capacity and the incentives to use that capacity positively is as important an element of the design as anything else in infrastructure development.